There's a wonderful traditional proverb over there, which is actually a belief in many parts of the world that it takes a village to educate a child. And it is so true, and you see a lot of examples of this happening in real life also, where um, a society, a village becomes responsible for the upbringing of a child. So let's see why this particular proverb has been used over here. I'm sure as we read the chapter, we will understand the relevance of this proverb here. So, changing a school of thought. It takes a village to educate a child, a traditional proverb. Picture a girl who has been excluded from school. She is dressed in a faded salwar kameez. Her feet are bare. She is crouched in the corner of a dark room. She rarely, what happened? She rarely speaks, but when she does, her voice is deep and husky from years of cooking over an open fire. She is skinny from malnutrition and she is tired from anemia. She struggles to make eye contact. She has no self esteem. She has been hollowed out by patriarchy and a feeling of being worthless. This is a problem that I know still exists in our world, despite economic growth and innovation, despite everything we all call progress. That is a problem we all need to see. Now imagine the same little girl dressed in a clean, pressed uniform. She wears her hair in two neat plaits tied with red ribbons. She has a school bag strapped to her back and is walking confidently down the road towards school. She is smiling, chatting with her friends. She has a hot lunch in school, learns in the classroom, and plays with her fellow students. Now she holds her head high. We knew out of school girls were most likely to be on the margins. So we had to work on the margins geographically. This meant working in the most rural, remote, and tribal areas. Economic margins meant working with the poorest of the poor. Social margins meant most of those we worked with were not only rural but also from tribal, lower caste, or minority communities. But once at the margins, the problem was mindset. The very idea that a girl's worth is lesser than a boy is a mindset, a school of thought, a way of thinking that can stand in the way of a girl accessing her fundamental human rights. If the problem is mindset, then the solution has to be human. I had to learn to change mindsets. But how? As we know from living in a highly polarized world that it is easier said than done. Unwanted stories. As we rounded the corner, Pinku pointed out the house to me. We had just come from a village in Pali, not that far from Falna, and a school where we had met with a group of girls who had now been attending regularly for a good few months. It was time to visit some of the homes where Pinku admitted she was struggling. This confident young woman had been on one of my first colleague Vikram's team for a little over a year and was proving to be one of our most tenacious team members. It was her fourth visit to try and enroll Prachi. I was to meet Prachi for the first time. I felt like she saw us coming. Sarita, Prachi's elegant mother, was standing at her doorstep, a baby hoisted onto her hip, wearing a beautiful full floral ghagra and a tight-fitting faded choli. The baby fiddled with the ochre yellow dupatta that obscured Sarita's eyes. But all the same, I knew she was checking me out as we slowly entered the house. I admit I started to feel a knot in my stomach, anticipating a difficult conversation, and the expectation of the team was high. We had had some success enrolling girls in this village. But there were still a few families left who were persistent in their refusal to send their girls to school, and Prachi was one of them. At least 11 girls were now going to the village school, and I had loved meeting them in the morning while joining in some of their lessons. The task at hand was about persuasion. We were invited in, and Pinku and I hesitantly sat down in her yard behind the house. Sarita was busy doing a myriad of chores. She had a baby hammock hanging on a small frame. A goat was tied to the side while her jet black lamb was running around freely. Prachi was also there, picking stones from lentils and cleaning them in a bowl of cloudy water before they could be cooked. She was close to 13 years old, had been pulled out of school, and we wanted to convince Sarita to enroll her back in. That was the first time that Sarita had met me. She knew the team well, and the team knew Sarita. But Pinku thought that my coming from Mumbai and sitting with her myself might just help. Perhaps a new face, a new story might help change Sarita's mind. She was polite and welcoming. But she already muttered to Pinku that we were wasting her time. Pinku pointed at me, encouraging me to step forward. ये सफीना है, सफीना जी हैं, सरिता। ये इनकी इन्हीं की संस्था है। ये मुंबई से आई हैं आपसे और प्राची से मिलने। This is Safina G. Sarita. It is her organization. She has come from Mumbai to meet you and Prachi. With her words, she tried to elevate my importance. With my hands clasped together as if in prayer, I bowed my head slightly and carried on where Pinku had left off. Sarita ji, I am so happy to meet you. Thank you so much for inviting me to your home. I was not sure if Sarita felt she had invited me into her home, but nonetheless, I wanted to thank her and say how happy I was to meet her. I immediately launched into an explanation of why I had come. I told her what we believed in, that education is every girl's right and that every girl should have the opportunity to go to school. I explained what was on my mind and in my heart. Girls' education was so important. Every girl needed to study and deserved to have the same opportunities as a boy. Without an education, girls couldn't earn. They couldn't become independent and get ahead in life. And then I got to the point. We would really like you to enroll Prachi back in school. This is why we had come. Sarita nodded at everything I said. I understand, she politely responded. But school is not for Prachi, she added in a more decisive tone. I tried a little more and asked her even more directly. Wouldn't you like Prachi to learn to read? To maybe get a good job or set up a small business? I speculated. I could feel Sarita's frustration rising. Etiquette, however, prevented her from being rude to me. So after 20 minutes or so, Sarita scooped up Prachi's little sister, who was now crawling around her, turned the baby to face me, held her tiny hand in hers, and made her wave goodbye to me. Back and forth she wiggled the baby's hand in hers. Ta-ta, auntie ko bye karo. Say bye to auntie, she implored her baby. And the little hand waved to and fro. She was signaling as strong as she could that the conversation was over and she wanted us to leave. Pinku interjected. She tried to explain that it was quite special for Sarita that I had visited her this time. She repeated how far I had come from. I was a leader of this NGO, she mentioned again. Her daughter's education was that important. But she was met with an awkward silence as Sarita placed the baby in the cradle and went back to her chores. Let's have a photo, Pinku suggested before Sarita could get away, and we gathered together. Sarita cocked her head and smiled a wry kind of smile as I shuffled awkwardly next to her and posed for the camera. A smile that said, "This isn't going to work." I felt like I could hear what she was thinking. I could read it in her eyes. Even if you take my photo, I can't enroll Prachi in school. Take my photo, take a video, put me on TV. I won't change my mind. I was convinced that this was what was going through her mind. As I moved to sit back down again, she beamed a big smile in my direction again. This was all in good humor and yet decisive. She was adamant. Her mind was made up. By now, Pinku and I had given up trying to change Sarita's thinking. We felt this was pretty much a dead end conversation. However, I had to wait for Vikram to pick me up, so I asked if we could wait there in her home for some more time. Sarita, relieved that the conversation had ended, nodded, and we hung back in her yard. I sat beside Prachi and could not resist playing with the little lamb, who was interested in chewing everything from my shawl to my notebook. With one hand on the lamb, I turned to Prachi. Do you miss school? I inquired. She said no, she didn't like school and had left after a fight. I was a little surprised and asked her what the fight was about. I was always fighting with the other children as they made fun of me, Prachi explained as she nonchalantly cleaned the lentils. Why did they make fun of you? I probed. Because I did badly in school. Then suddenly she pushed her hair back and showed me her ear. The ear was closed. It was deformed. I couldn't hear very well from that side, and so they all made fun of me. I kept on fighting with them, and finally I left the school swearing I would never go back. As I stroked the lamb and listened, I think started to warm up to me, but I still left feeling dejected. She would still not go to school, and nothing I had said had worked. Vikram came and picked me up, and we went to another home. He was one of the first people I had hired when we started work in Pali. He had responded to our need to hire someone to work on data analysis, but he soon became my keenest ally. Today, he leads our national team. When we arrived at the next house for our visit, there was only the father at home with his daughter Kirti. Vikram walked in and greeted him. Ram Ram Bhaiya. He introduced himself with a namaste. Kaise hain? How are you? And a knowledgeable enquiry about his season's harvest. The rains have been so good this year. I bet you will have had good returns from your harvest, he speculated in a knowing way. We noticed the peanuts laid out just in front of the house to be cleaned. So Vikram commented again on how well they had turned out that year. I wondered when he was going to start to ask about the little girl he had seen outside tending to the goats. But Vikram continued with more questions about how the peanuts were grown, where they were sold, and what else the father did beyond farming. Laboring, the man replied, adding that he, his wife, and his daughter Kirti would be leaving shortly for the building site. Vikram finally had an in. Will she just spend the rest of her life working? Let her study a bit too now, he said. We, of course, knew all along we wanted to ask about Kirti. We knew that she was not going to school. We knew we wanted to direct the conversation around to school, but Vikram knew the way to do this. As with Sarita, the response he got at first was not positive. The father, in a polite but detached manner, said that he was not interested. Education may be a good thing, but he did not think he needed it for his daughter. She was only going to get married and settle down in another home. Vikram agreed with him. It was true that most girls would marry and settle down. But then he went on to recount a deeply personal story of his own sister who had grown up in Pali just 25 kilometers from where we were. A story that he thought they might relate to. His younger sister, Vikram explained, was educated up to graduation level. She married a man from a family of landowners who did not really have any other skill or income beyond what they earned from their land. After a dispute ensued, his sister and her husband fell out with his family and were estranged from their in laws. They had no income or prior training to fall back on. And to make things worse, her husband was diagnosed with epilepsy, so it was even more difficult for him to find work. Therefore, the burden to earn fell on Vikram's sister's shoulders. But here was the thing, because of her education, she was able to start a career as an Anganwadi worker. Without her education, her whole family would have suffered greatly with the unexpected illness in the family. Health shocks are very often a major cause of families falling into or back into poverty. Vikram explained what his father always said when recalling this story. When my daughter married, I paid her dowry. सबसे कीमती दहेज तो मैंने उससे दिया वो थी उसकी शिक्षा. The most valuable dowry I gave was actually her education. Vikram quoted his father in a serious, proud voice. Kirti's father nodded, obviously taking in the whole story, but he then had his own questions, stress testing Vikram's story and its authenticity. Which caste was Vikram's family from? Where did he stay? Which district? Which block? How much land had they owned? Are these people like me? I could sense him wanting to ask, is this story relevant for me, for my family, for Kirti? He then paused and, after a brief thought, concluded, come back next time and let me see the form. The father was quite matter of fact in his statement, as if nothing much had changed. But everything had. With this one simple statement, so much had changed, and it was clear that Vikram had opened the door to a conversation. Now the work really began, but this was the moment we knew something shifted. Vikram's conversation had been a turning point. Dowry was a currency that his father had understood. Dowry held a value he recognized. There was cultural resonance. It took Vikram and the team another 3 visits before Kirti was finally enrolled in school. The form was shared with the father, and Vikram took him to meet the headmaster and see the school for himself. The rather aloof grandmother I had sat with, who was also somewhat dismissive of her granddaughter's need for education, had also needed persuading. But in the end, she was convinced. Where I had felt the door closing in my face with Sarita and Prachi, Vikram had succeeded in cracking it open, and the result spoke for itself. That evening, I reflected on those 2 visits. What could I learn from those encounters? Those 2 attempts at enrollment. What were the elements that led to failure in one household and the beginnings of success in the other? What was at the root of changing a mindset, a school of thought? What did it take? Vikram was local from the same district. He spoke the dialect. He took the time to build a rapport with the father. He did not talk at him about why girls should be educated, but demonstrated the value of girls' education through a deeply authentic and relatable personal experience. Vikram used the right story. I felt I was an outsider when I thought through my attempts and how I could be perceived. But it was not just that. Vikram was an insider. It was also how he built a relationship with this father. What could I have done differently with Sarita? Even if I had been a local, there were things I should have done differently. I should have listened to her and to Prachi. I should have asked more questions. I realized I had talked at Sarita. I had launched into my story and my opinions and not really given either of them an opportunity to share their story. I had not appreciated what their silence and polite smiles had really meant. We debriefed as a team to see what we could do in Prachi's case. We decided that we would go back and speak with Sarita about getting Prachi evaluated at the government hospital for her hearing, and then if she could get a disability certificate given the situation with her ear, she would be eligible for a state pension. We had to restart our conversation with Sarita and Prachi and see if that helped bring her back to school. If not, access to this scheme would still provide Prachi with a regular income and help her sustain herself financially. I had, of course, made a large number of home visits before that day. We were in our first year of operations, and I went out a lot with the team, but that day was different. The contrast between mine and Vikram's approaches had never been so clear to me, and I had learnt important lessons. For a mindset change to happen, you have to show the value of an education, not just tell. I was slowly starting to realize the power of storytelling is challenging mindsets and changing minds. Telling a story can connect people. Through a story, you can share perspectives, and more than anything, a story can evoke feelings and encourage sympathy, empathy. But this must be done as part of building a relationship, investing time and effort in creating a rapport, listening and learning, and not just approaching it as a transactional exercise. The story has to have a local context and come with an authentic, relevant message. The next question was, how would we take this to larger audiences? Since most of you people in the group are teachers, I would ask you to pay special attention to the use of this powerful medium of storytelling. Just see how beautifully, without saying anything about storytelling being a medium, the author has brought this out in this particular portion of the chapter. Clothes speak volumes. Her future is to get married and have children. She can learn all that at home. What is the point of sending her to school? An education will only spoil her and she will not follow her culture. I had heard statements like these over and over again while visiting girls' families at their homes. But this was not something I had heard in more public settings. Apart from individual meetings with parents and families, we also started to conduct village level meetings. Word would go out to the village leadership a couple of weeks in advance, and we would collaborate in getting a critical mass of the community together in one place. I remember one particularly large meeting where there must have been around 200 people. It felt like a fair. People were sitting in a large circle. There were men on nearby roofs and children in trees swinging their legs and watching the proceedings with curiosity and excitement. Vijay Lakshmi, one of our most charismatic block officers, was running the meeting. She welcomed everyone warmly, introducing all the key stakeholders who were there, from the sarpanch to the headmasters and other influencers of the community. Then she proceeded to speak of the number of girls who were not in school in the village and made a plea to their parents for all of them to be enrolled. While she was speaking very passionately, I noticed a young man leaning on a bicycle, looking restless and chewing pan. While Vijay Lakshmi was still addressing the crowd, he interrupted. We don't send our girls to schools because we know what happens when they do. He smirked and carried on chewing the pan, muffling his words. Kya hota hai? What happens? Asked Vijay Lakshmi with a tone of feigned ignorance. She knew what he was likely to say. It was something she had heard many times before. But still, she gave him the opportunity to explain. The young man turned his head away from the crowd, spat loudly, and sprayed blood red pan and saliva across the parched ground. They wear short clothes and have love marriages, he proclaimed, this time with an empty mouth and a lot more clarity. There was silence. Everyone was looking at Vijayalakshmi to see her reaction. It immediately crossed my mind that a majority of those at the meeting were probably thinking the same thing as this brazen young man. They were just not ready to be the first to say it loud. I ran through a couple of responses in my head, trying to frame the way I might react, but I drew a blank. I had no idea what to say. This time, I really felt like an outsider, sitting among so many people with some obvious tension. The children continued to swing their legs to and fro, lightening the situation a little. Surely nothing serious like a fight could happen with so many youngsters around, but I wasn't sure. My eyes bounced from the young man to Vijayalakshmi and back again, and then rested on her as she scanned the crowd, identified the headmaster, and drew him into the conversation. She addressed him confidently but tried to show an air of bafflement. Sir, she began, gesturing across the crowd. आपकी एक बेटी है ना? You have a daughter, right? Yes, replied the headmaster. He did not look that much older than the pan chewing man, but he was calm and authoritative. And you educated your daughter, right, sir? I did, confirmed the headmaster, nodding emphatically. So is she wearing short clothes and running away from home to get her love marriage? Are you teaching all these things to your in your school, sir? She pointed beyond the crowd to the school building. At first, there was a hush, and in the deafening silence, I realized I had been holding my breath. And then everyone in the meeting held out a raucous laugh, and the tension was immediately diffused. The headmaster got up and gave the young man a sharp scolding for talking rubbish. He explained to everyone how school was for studying and learning languages, mathematics, physical education, and all the other subjects. What this young man was referring to were cultural values which were learnt in the home and family. He firmly put the insolent young man in his place and convinced the community that they must send their girls to attend the school. He also offered to give admission right on the spot at the meeting for all those who agreed. That day, I learned another valuable lesson, this time from Vijayalakshmi. I learned the importance of local role models and influencers in driving a mindset change. She had drawn the village leaders in and made them lead this conversation. Her careful questions of the headmaster had ensured that the message came from him, not her. Of course, we understood that cultural values can also be learned or reaffirmed at school as well as in the family. But the headmaster's argument that day was just what we had needed in the moment. Vijayalakshmi rightly knew that the people were far more likely to listen to the village leader and school headmaster than they were to us. Sorry, yeah. So she had invited them to respond to this man, and thereby ensured that the community came up with their own answers. There had been no telling by us. She had merely facilitated the right people and the right message. While I had sat there trembling, unable to think how to react to this young man and his rigid mindset, Vijayalakshmi had turned everything around. She was a true community ownership of our mission, and I began to see the power of local stories in one village after another. So that's the second example. Beneath the veil, Madhuri stood up in front of the large crowd which had gathered in front of the school building. She was veiled, but peeped out of her pallu to look over a crowd of some 40 villagers. To her right, the older men sat cross-legged, clothed in white, and the younger men sat behind them. To her left and further back, the ladies joined the meeting, all veiled, and the children sat among them. This was a particularly conservative village, and yet, unusually, they had a female sarpanch, Madhuri Kholi. Madhuri started off with a question. Why aren't you girls going to school? A cacophony of voices answered with an overwhelming message. Who's going to do all the housework then? फिर घर का काम कौन करेगा? There was indignant laughs. Men and women alike gestured at the floor that lay between Madhuri and them, as if to point out that it needed sweeping. This was also what many parents said to us, time and again. They said they had no choice. There was no one else. Girls had to stay home. Who would look after the siblings? Who would collect the water? Who would prepare the food? Was wash the clothes? Housework was a constant repeated theme, a leitmotif of sorts. But Madhuri was adamant and respectfully challenged them all. It's not about the work. You can manage somehow. Today, tomorrow, and the rest of your life, there's going to be work to do at home. Regardless, it is important to educate our girls. हमारी बालिकाओं को पढ़ाना बहुत जरूरी है. Then she gestured to one of the girls, Swati, and who had been a recent dropout but was now back in the classroom. The 7-year-old stood up and confidently recited the English alphabet, all 26 letters. Grins stretched across every face in the meeting. It was impossible for the gathered adults not to acknowledge this little girl's effort. This is my grandmother, said one of the older gentlemen. Hitan announced. Hitan's granddaughter knew English now in a village where no one understood the language. There was joy in her eyes as the potential of her knowledge. Yeah. Hitan is shedding a tear. He is so proud, a woman cried out, almost mockingly. He drew a crumpled hanky from his pocket and wiped his cheek as Madhuri questioned him. You won't pull her out of school again, will you, Hitanji? I won't, responded her proud grandfather. Madhuri was smart. She had celebrated Hitan in front of his community and in doing so had created an ally for herself. Someone respected by the village had made a public government to keep the granddaughter in school. Madhuri then went on to share her own story. If I wasn't educated, I wouldn't have been elected to this role of Sarpanch, Madhuri explained. Madhuri was part of the village leadership, and what she had so widely done was build public accountability to her mission, and this group meeting was helping. Hitan, an elder but not a leader, had spoken out. He had made an open commitment to education in front of his neighbors and friends, and the hope was that peer pressure might help him to keep his granddaughter in school and at the same time build aspiration through little Swati for other girls in the village and for other families. In a village where no one spoke English, she had built the credibility of school and education through little Swati reciting her ABCs. It was one thing getting the village leaders on our side. The next was getting the full village, the community members themselves, to acknowledge the role they played and the responsibility they needed to take for girls to go to school. Madhuri had certainly made the girls impact in the meeting. Using the right tone, hitting the right note, using the right examples, she championed the girls and yet respected the local customs. Beneath her veil, she confirmed, but at the same time pushed the village to change. Larger village meetings were getting our messages heard at scale, and both leaders and the village at large were starting to change their minds and build a village wide commitment. There was immense power in mobilizing everyone to make a case for girls. The space for mindset change in sorry um, There was immense power in mobilizing everyone to make a case for girls' education. Through their own examples, they created the space for mindset change in their communities as we started to realize the power of storytelling. Our job was to create the right platforms. And then it was all about stories being told so that new stories could be written for the girls.
Brinda, can we take a pause here?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I just want to bring up two, three things which
Yeah,
one, I find this is a great book for teachers.
absolutely.
It's an
Ab-
ideal, it's a brilliant book about teachers, how we handle the challenges of societal level. And it's not always easy to convince everyone to go to school. We have seen
yes.
in this. Second, what I find in this very good is the human relations aspect. So the
Mm,
gentleman who is actually a IT person, how beautifully he is navigating with the community
yeah,
patiently. So it goes back to what we were talking other day in the other session about patience. So
yes,
patience here is
yes,
exemplified in this particular part of the book we've been reading today. And last thing, what I
absolutely.
really want is that the teachers, we all teachers here, by the way, there are no students today. So I
Yeah,
want these teachers to act as role models to read to teachers. My concern
yes.
at the moment at a national level is we do have people who connect with us,
Mm,
and it's always going to be few because end of the day, writing there's one author, but reading there are million people. So similarly, reading now has become one person, but telling people about reading, you need million connections.
yes.
So I think the people who come here are all true champions. We need to use them, or I shouldn't be saying use. It's not a good word.
We
We
need
use
to
we
inspire them to inspire others.
inspire others absolutely, and I
Yeah,
don't want them
yeah.
to come here. I want you to use the recording of this session as a classroom resource. So our goal is very simple.
Yes.
Our goal at the Learning Forward Foundation is to make best in class learning resource for teachers. That's what our goal is. And that's precisely why some years
Yeah.
back the World Bank, and it still stands at that, it found us as a great innovation for learning. And this is very different
Yes.
because you're not reading a book, you're not talking a book, you're not listening a book, but you're
Absolutely.
actually seeing a book being performed.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like when you
True.
when you're talking, it's like a performance. It likes theater.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
are on
Yeah.
theater where you are saying your script. It just so happens the script is visible to us.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it's a very unique way, and I think we really love you for that. Thank you so much for
Thank
all
you.
the effort you do. I just hope that we can inspire more teachers to join us.
Yes, I think today, of course, as far as the teachers in Gyanshri school are concerned, I think they had an extra hour of work. So I presume some of them who regularly join us haven't joined us today. But Pushpita is here, and I must say a big thank you to Pushpita for being here. She's our representative for GSA also. So thank you, Pushpita. But let's motivate some more of our teachers to join, and
Um,
we would request the others also to do that. Yes,
Yeah, we have
Pushpita.
Minakshi from Ayodhya. Minakshi, you
Yeah.
want to add something? You are regular. I do see you
Yes.
attending session, Minakshi.
sir, Jai Hind, sir.
Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, madam.
Jai Hind, ma'am. I
Jai Hind.
always attend your seminar and book reading session, and
Ah,
feel very happy, and I learn a lot with you and sir. So
Oh,
that's
thank
why I
you.
always attend this
Yeah.
session.
So अब आप औरों से भी बात करिए and tell them we should all read and we should all, listen to reading. So even
Yes.
if 45 minutes is not a huge amount of time in the day to spend to
एंड
improve
वंस अ वीक भी अगर
ourselves.
आएंगे ना वृंदा, वंस अ
हाँ,
वीक भी आएंगे तो हम 6 महीने में एक किताब खत्म कर लेंगे,
खत्म कर
साल
लेंगे.
में 2 किताब ही तो पढ़ेंगे और क्या पढ़ेंगे.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And with
बट
the
जीरो
children,
जीरो से
Sandeep,
दो तो 200% है.
absolutely. I think take the
I will
example of
attend
our
your
Sunday
session.
school.
I wait
Yeah,
for
that of course
Thursday.
is good.
Yeah, because in the last so many years that we've started GSA Sunday School, how many books the children have been able to read?
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
course, it's not the same set of children, but yet I think it's a huge change.
32 books we've read, Brinda.
Yeah,
32 books we've read.
yeah, yeah,
I was
yeah,
counting the other day. I said
absolutely.
32 books we've read.
32 books, imagine. Yes, true.
So there are over
So,
600 videos on the channel. There's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
612
yeah,
videos. I was
yeah.
looking
You
at
had
them yesterday.
shared this last time also.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah.
What a wonderful effort this is. And storytelling is such a powerful medium of education. That's why in between when we took a small pause, I mentioned this that this is a chapter that teachers have to particularly pay attention to, that how you can affect the mindset of anybody, not only children. And it's all about changing mindset. So, Sandeep, I just finished reading an extremely interesting book called Math Ish by Joe Bowler, and I'm not a math person, but when I read this book, I realized that how math can be taught visually and through stories and through changing mindsets of people. So if we look at it, it's such a wonderful medium. And here's a practical example of how stories can influence people. So good
Brinda,
chapter.
if you see in this book, you are learning maths because you started with that chapter
Yes,
about going wrong in the bank.
absolutely.
So the power of numbers was shown in the first chapter, that if you don't
Yeah,
have your numbers right, and
true.
it pains me every day when I go back and I left money home and I
Yeah.
ask them, and I'm trying to teach my people home, is diary mein itna bada likho, write the figures like this. It really pains me that they can't. But the fancy part is they have a bank account, they go to the bank, they do transactions. So
And
I
they don't
asked
know what
them,
they're doing. Yeah,
yeah, I asked them,
yeah.
I said, how do you manage this? So they have no
Ah,
answer.
ah.
And I'm talking of an urban area, and what
That's
we
right.
saw
Yes.
the example we saw here was a rural area.
Rural area.
And here
Absolutely.
the bank is across the road to my home,
True.
and the
True.
people who work on my premises, it was an ordeal
Yeah.
for me to first, kind of educate them for the need of a bank account.
Absolutely. Yes. True.
And then I asked them, how do you transfer your money? हम बैंक बाबू को बोल देते हैं, वो
बोल
भेज
देते
देता है. मैंने कहा
हैं.
कहाँ भेजता है, कभी तुमको पता लगा है? नहीं, पर
हाँ,
मैसेज तो घर में आ ही जाता है ना.
हाँ.
I said, चलो, thank God for that much grace,
Yeah,
at least
that's
मैसेज घर
right.
में आ जाता
मैसेज
है.
घर में आ जाता है. Correct.
Anyway, times,
All right.
it's a lot good time. We had never had a better time than today to learn.
Yes. Yes,
I think
absolutely.
you've been around for 50 years and I've been around
Yeah,
for 50
yeah.
years in the learning space.
Yeah, yeah.
I
True.
think these are beautiful times. They are
Yes.
absolutely beautiful
There's no
times to
doubt
learn.
about it.